Hello magical hands and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, hi, my name is Jessica, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for coming back. This portion of the video is the part 2, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how to cut this beautiful Victorian corset as well as how to sew it. Now if you've not watched the part 1, make sure to check my previous video or check the link in the comment section for that. And without any further ado, let's dive into this video proper. So I have my stuff here. I have the patterns which are already drafted in part 1. Make sure you watch that video before watching this one so you understand the whole thing going on here. So I have my scissors, I have my lining. This is just pieces of lining that I have lying around, but we're going to make it work. I have gum stay, and I'm going to be using this gum stay for my lining piece just to give it some hold, because the lining is this very light lining. But if you have enough gum stay, you can also add to your main fabric as well, which is totally optional. And I have this wadding here. You can see that this wadding is almost finished. I will need it for the cups of the top parts of this Victorian corset. So for this piece of Ankara fabric, I have exactly 1 yard, and you can see the way the pattern of this fabric is. I really want everything to be projected in the way the fabric is, so I went ahead to fold my fabric into 2 so that the orange pattern can fall on the same part, and then I can go ahead and place all my patterns so that way I will cut both the front and the back pieces. That is, I'll cut them 2 pieces for each all at once. So after placing it, I already went ahead to chalk down my allowance, and for the allowance, the top part and the lower part, I added only half an inch, and then for the sides I added 1 inch. You can add half an inch, but I'm going to explain why I used 1 inch, because I really want to have as much allowance as I need. So on all the sides I added 1 inch, but on the top and the lower part I added half an inch. So you can go ahead and start cutting. Also, I cut my center front in 2 separate pieces. If you want to use that box, if you want to be fixing a box, just go ahead and continue with what you're seeing. I will tell you guys the points where you need to fix a box in yours. So after cutting this, I have all my pieces here, the front and the back pieces. Remember, we cut this on fold, so we have 2 pieces for each of them. So I took out my center front and my middle front, and I'm going to be placing the wadding on this. I'm going to show you guys where to stop placing this wadding. Your wadding is not supposed to get down, and I'm going to be placing this wadding only on the main fabrics. So we're going to keep the linings aside. So you place your fabric on the wadding as seen, and make sure that your wadding is placed from the under bust, that is where the curve starts from, and then make sure to pull out that 1 inch for side seam allowance from it at the other side, not on the curved side. And then after you cut this, make sure to remove the half an inch at the top part, because this wadding is not supposed to get in the way of any of the sewing allowances that we added. This one is just supposed to be there on its own, so that it's, by the time if it gets in the way of any of the sewing allowances, it will be hard for us to turn, it will be hard for us to sew, and we don't want that. We just want the effect to be on the bust side, which is the curved side. So after using my iron to place the wadding, this is what it looks like. I went ahead to trim it a bit, and I also added some to this part, because if you join this from the lower bodice, we are going to join it from the lower bodice upwards, you are going to see that the under bust line are supposed to align. So make sure your wadding gets to that under bust line, and then make sure to trim it from that half an inch, that 1 inch sewing allowance, same way you can see at the center front. So this is what the patterns look like. We are going to go ahead and start sewing. In sewing, there is really no order in sewing, so long as you are placing the right pieces together. There is no order in sewing. So I'm just going to start with one of the center cups and the middle cups, and I'm going to start sewing from the underside. I've said this before, start sewing from the underside, and make sure to sew exactly 1 inch, which is what you added for your seam allowances. And if you want accuracy, make sure to take your chalk and your marker and chalk down 1 inch. I know what 1 inch looks like, but for the sake of this tutorial, I don't mind going over it over and over again. So just take your time and sew exactly 1 inch, and you'll see how beautiful this will turn out. Now this is what the bustier looks like. I know the allowance is very big, but it was intentional and there's a reason for that, and we'll understand as we go further. So now I'm going to add my third piece to this, which is the side front. Now this is what it looks like. This is what the three pieces looks like, and I also did the same thing to the other side of it as well. So you can see how I took my time to sew the exact 1 inch sewing allowance that we talked about, and make sure to do the same thing to the other piece of the front piece. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and join the front pieces together. We're going to join them at that 1 inch sewing allowance at that point. Now if you want to use a box, you don't have to sew this yet. You are going to turn this with your lining and insert your box, but I am not using a box, neither am I using a zip at the front. So this is what we have so far. Next, we are going to open up the seams using our iron. And it's very important to open up your seam anytime you are sewing, whether it's a corset or anything at all. It's very important to open up your seams. It helps your fabric relax a lot better. But in this case, we really need to open up the seams because we are going to be creating our boning channels through this sewing allowance. Now this is why I intentionally used 1 inch for sewing allowance, so I can have enough space to create a big boning channel. Now for the bustier part, I'm going to not just open the seams like that. I'm going to need my tailor's ham, and I'm going to use that to help me, flatten this out properly. Don't just open up your bustier on the bare floor. Make sure to use your ham to open this up. Now at this point, we are going to start sewing the boning cases, and this depends on the size of your bonings. Now right at that bust point, at that bust area, that under bust, that is where my boning case is going to end, just right at that point. Now start sewing my boning cases using that allowance that I marked 1 inch. Now we know why the allowance is very big, so by the time you are done sewing your boning case, you can go ahead and trim it. So for that bust side, that is the cup side, the bustier side, I'm going to start sewing from underneath as seen. Just watch closely, and I will stop at the under bust and turn and back stitch at this point, and then flip over and continue. So that is where the boning for that side will stop. I don't want the boning to go over my bust because I don't want this to compress my breast because I am quite busty. If you're not busty and you want to do that, it is fine. After creating the boning channels, you will see that from that under bust, we want this allowance to relax very well. So I'm going to notch. If you don't know, you're supposed to notch on all the curved side of your garments. Anything at all you're making, so long as it's curved, it is important to notch so that you can relax properly. So I'm just going to make notches at that point, and you can also reduce the seam allowance there because that is what we need to do with that part. Over to the back piece, we are still going to join the center back to the middle back, and then join from the middle back to the side back. We are going to do that for both the pieces, that's the left and the right side of the back piece. Afterwards, this is what I have both my back pieces. I'm just going to trim off at the top side. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to sew from the downside upwards. So if there's anything you need to trim, it's better to trim at the top parts. So now that I'm done sewing it, I'm going to open up the seams again. And once I'm done opening up the seams, I will create boning channels using my seam allowance. I'll just sew up 1/2 inch. I have already gone ahead to open up the seams and also sew up the boning cases of the back piece. Now we're going to join this back piece to the front pieces, and we're going to join that using the side seams, that is the side back and the side front. Okay, this is how they are going to be placed, and you join them by the sides using the 1 inch seam allowance that we added to the side seams. Now this is what we have. So we are going to open up the side seam with our iron. Now the side seams is the only seam that you will not be creating a boning channel for, but that part is totally optional. I've never thought about it before. Let me know if you attach a boning to your side seams, but like I said, that's the only seam that does not need a boning channel. So after that, now I want to create a bit of shape at the base. So at that point, at the side, I went upwards by 2 inches, of which I wish I'd gone up by 4 or 3 inches, but all the same, you still saw the result. And I'll use my curve ruler and curve it to meet the midpoint of this, which is around like the center back area, and then I will cut this out. So you can deepen the shape you want to give this depending on what you want. And then for the other side, I'll just fold my fabric, and I'm going to take that allowance that I cut from the other side. I'll place on it. That will help me, that will be a guide for me to cut this other side perfectly without marking my measurements. So now this is what it looks like. I did not shape the lining, it's only the main fabric that I did that shaping to. I will do that later, but first of all I have to use the lining to turn the main fabric. And also, if you're wondering where this lining is coming from, let me explain. All the processes, all the steps we did to the main fabric is the same thing we would do to the lining. So just go ahead and trim out any uneven line. Just make sure everything is laying nice and clean as supposed to. I'll place my lining right face facing the main fabric, and you can also see that I open up the seams of the lining. It's very important. So now I'm going to place this as in, and I'm going to start sewing. I will sew along the whole top part. Make sure that the armhole aligns, make sure that everything is equal so you can have a nice result. So just sew up as indicated and downwards. Don't sew the base of this. After sewing, this is what it looks like. So around the top part, like I said, you're supposed to notch every curved area of your garment. So we're going to make notches around that point. So by the time we flip it over and we iron it, everything is going to relax nice. And at this point, we can start trimming the excess lining. Just make sure everything aligns. After which we can flip it over, and this is what the Victorian corset is looking like. It's all coming together. So right at this point, before we do anything, we'll have to iron every single piece. And once we're done ironing, after ironing at the center back, I'm going to mark 1 inch, and that 1 inch I'm going to mark, I'm going to sew it so that I can fix a boning there before I can even go ahead to fix my eyelets in that area. Afterwards, I took it to the guy that usually puts eyelets for me at the market, and I marked the points where he will put the eyelets. Afterwards, this is what it looks like after I have finished every single thing that I need to do. I just need to iron this and also remove that paper by the side. In order to close up the lower bodice of this, I cut out this piece of fabric, I think about 1 inch wide. Now if you want this to show on the top part, which I don't want it to show because you can see that the color of that bias that I cut is not matching with the orange fabric that I already drafted to be at the lower part. So we are going to sew this in such a way that it's not going to show at the front, but it's rather going to show at the back. So what you're going to do is to place it on the right face, make a stitch first, and then you flip it over. So this is what it looks like as I'm sewing after I flipped it over. So you will see that this our bias is going to show on the lining face and not on the good face. And this is what the final result looks like. If you watched to this point and you've not subscribed, please do well to hit the subscribe button, do well to like, do well to share, and don't forget to subscribe again. That being said, see you guys in my next tutorial. Bye.